Thank you so much. That's a very lovely introduction, Rhoda. Thank you for having me today. I gave this presentation a few months ago at this PhD Live in, I think it was October, and I found the experience really enjoyable and also incredibly useful for me to hear more about what my peers were up to as well. I have cut down the words this time around because I realised I talked far too much last time. I'd prepared myself in far too much detail. So I'm going to give you a broad overview. This is a presentation that I developed after my first year in the PhD, where I undertook some research and development with some funding, and it really helped to support the development of my PhD in so many ways. So I'm going to share some of that experience with you today. So I thought I'd start first of all to just give you a bit of an overview about what I'm going to talk through today. So I used a research support award in my first year of the PhD to reframe my research questions, update my research proposal, develop my methods and sources chapters, and apply for ethical approval, which you'll all be going through. And I had it approved first time. But more than that, it really built my confidence and capacity to undertake research in the real world. And first of all, my journey to the PhD started a few years ago when I undertook a master's, but before that, as the introduction shared, I was working within Glasgow's cultural sector. I did a number of different roles. My focus was around audience development, project management, fundraising. I worked with lots of different organisations for a period doing freelance research and development. And then I took some time out to do the Masters in Creative Industries and Cultural Policy. And during that time, I came across a manifesto for craft in Scotland. And through the Masters dissertation work, I interviewed 14 makers and craftspeople and policymakers that have been involved in its development. And it really illuminated some interesting questions around how the craft sector in Scotland organises itself, the kind of labour that's involved in making craft in Scotland in contemporary society. And it led me through that process to want to explore it further in a PhD. So I did some freelance research and evaluation while I was applying for the PhD, and then I was funded through the College of Arts Caisson Scholarship, so I'm doing it full time. And I'm in halfway through my second year, and it seems to have flown by. I don't know about everybody else, but it's gone so fast already. So I keep going out of this slide share bit. Here we go. So this, I wanted to put this up on screen, not that you have to read all the text because there is a lot of text there, but just to show that my PhD proposal, when I first started, had a number of research questions. It was quite long-winded, and I'm going to show you what it's become since at the end of this presentation as a means to show you how much the experience of undertaking this R&D process has really supported my thinking and enabled me to really focus. This proposal was far too broad. I was setting myself up to fail because I wasn't able to focus my attention down. And my supervisors caught that at the first meeting and said, that's too much, you're doing too much. You have to think much more carefully about what you're going to be able to achieve within a 3-year PhD. And they very wisely and serendipitously pointed me in the direction of the School of Culture and Creative Arts Research Support Awards, and told me to think about what I might like to do in order to scope out some of my project in a way that would allow me to pilot some of the ideas I was having in a really risk-free way with some support funds. And so I'm going to talk you through now some of the practicalities. So the Research Support Awards come out 4 times a year. I'm going to talk through the School of Culture and Creative Arts Research Support Awards because that's the version that I applied to. I have also, subsequent to this experience, now also received a College of Arts Research Support Award. It's a very similar process, but other graduate schools will be able to point you in the direction of where to find out information specific to your school if you're not in this particular school. So the form sections are, there's a section to detail the reasons for applying, a breakdown of funding applied for, where you need to provide an itemized budget, but it's very simple. It's just a table of items and the costs associated. The details of the outcomes you want to achieve. Maybe it's specifically going to support a particular chapter in your PhD, or maybe it's, as I wanted to, scope out some of the ethics of fieldwork, the dates of activity, any other sources of funding that you might have access to, and a statement of support from your supervisor. I very much went away and scoped all this out and then took it back to one of my supervisor meetings, and we discussed it together and kind of edited it along the way. The application process is very straightforward. You complete the application form, your supervisor completes a final section to kind of approve it, and then it's sent to a named contact by a deadline. There's 4 deadlines a year, and you can apply each time if you want. So you can get funded in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, or you can just apply once in the year. It's up to you. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks for the applications to be processed. If you're unsuccessful, you can revisit it, rewrite it, maybe adapt it, and then put it in for the next round. If you're successful, you complete the activity you propose to do, and you submit a project report, which is a very simple, again, a template, a pro forma that says, just give us some details about what you did and what you achieved as a result. And you've got to document the expenditure, keep any receipts for anything that you have spent money on over that period. So the benefits of completing a research support award application. There's 4 things I want to talk through that really were benefits to me and my project. So it provided a mechanism to communicate the PhD project and its aims to a new audience, someone who's not an expert. You're talking to your supervisors, you're talking to people that maybe know quite a lot about the project, stepping back and thinking, how am I going to communicate the aims of this project to someone who knows nothing about it, is a really good discipline to get yourself into. And it helps you be very, very certain about what you want to do, and also the difficult bits where it's not quite working. It allows you to kind of disentangle those and reframe them. So that was very helpful. It helps plan your time practically to meet your ambitions. I had to set out a very rigorous fieldwork schedule or scoping schedule from January to May last year for activity, and I had to set myself key times and dates to complete this activity, and think about how to structure that around the other work like reading and writing and other activities. So it's a really good discipline to approach year 1, when often you're kind of left in a very open space to figure out your own timetable. So it was very useful for that. It provides a format to think about what you hope to achieve with your research. And it really, through the conversations and through planning the time of the Research Support Award, it allowed me to think about how this research might have impact in the long run. Who might it connect to, and how might I communicate it with them? And finally, it supports a process to undertake preparatory research on the pragmatics of dates, times, travel costs. You have to get into the mode of figuring things out in very specific ways when you're applying for the Research Support Award. It's not just a case of saying, I'll do some travel. You have to say, I'm going to get on this specific train on this day, and it's going to cost me that much. And it makes you really think about prioritizing your time in the research. So on to the next thing. Keep losing my cursor. There we go. So what did I do with the money? So I was successful. I was awarded £145, which isn't a huge amount of money, but it actually allowed me to do a real significant amount of things over January to May last year. So what did I do? I went to the National Museums of Scotland's Research Library and the Scottish Life Archive. There I got to play around in their archive materials. I got to survey the whole Scottish Life Archive and evaluate what might be available for me to use for my research. And I got to test the process of being in an archive and documenting my experience and my research findings. It was a really good start to think about the amount of time it takes to access archival materials and the discipline it needs to document all of those stages. And the second thing I did was I went to Fife Contemporaries Resolve exhibition at Kirkcaldy Galleries. The research I just realised that I didn't actually read out the research title, but I'm exploring craft maker associations. So I was there to look at sustainability practices within craft makers' work, and this exhibition was on for a few weeks during that period, and it allowed me to go up to Kirkcaldy and really read all the interpretation materials and see it in situ. And these are some images that I took as a part of a kind of also testing my ability to document that visually for my own kind of research and recall. I went to Craft Town, Scotland, which is West Kilbride on the west coast. I went to the Barony Centre for the Scottish Potters Association's annual exhibition. I met with a dozen potters, had tea with them, talked to them, started to test out what it might look like to be an ethnographic participant in some of these spaces, and also reminded myself of the email traffic and the questions that come before and after that kind of experience, how much labour is involved in ethnographic research, and also how much they share of their wider life and the ethical considerations that comes with documenting those kind of personal stories. I went to National Museums of Scotland's Research Library and Scottish Life Archive again to do a second visit, and at the same time also visited Creative Cred, which is an exhibition on creative informatics at the University of Edinburgh. And I got to meet some key people that are now subsequently core participants in the research. And that experience helped me to position myself within as a kind of visible person in the sector, a key event, and also negotiate some access points for fieldwork. And it really helps. Being able to attend these things gives you credibility when you're talking to participants, because they can see that you're invested in them and their sector by making yourself visible. I went to, there's a picture of me at Glasgow Women's Library, which is in the East End of Glasgow. I attended the archive and got to play around with materials related to craft associations. It was interesting in as much as there wasn't as much useful material in this archive as I was expecting, and the amount of time it took to negotiate access and the cost benefit analysis was off on this one, but because I was doing it as a scoping exercise and not as a core part of my research, it allowed me to learn a huge amount about the amount of time it takes to negotiate access to materials that might not essentially end up being useful for the research at all. But it also allowed me to test out note-taking, documentation, kind of my capacity to evaluate archival materials. And this one is on the top, you can see my son taking part in a workshop run by the Scottish Potters Association at Potfest, which is a festival of ceramics and pottery that took place at Scone Palace in Perth. And I also went to the Dunkeld Makers Collective and the Burnham Institute in Dunkeld and Burnham. So most of the costs associated with this is all travel costs, really. But doing this on my own, I wouldn't have necessarily taken the opportunity to do as many things. This allowed me to test out fieldwork at a very busy, well-attended event and think about how I document that. But it also allowed me to practice my spiel at presenting myself as a researcher and think about how I make people feel at ease when I start to talk to them and ask them questions related to my research. So I did an enormous amount in a few months. One of the things I should say is that although I'd planned out all the dates in advance, all the dates shifted around, and the administrators for the support boards were very accommodating when I said, I was going to go in February, it needed to shift to April, that was fine. So even if it doesn't happen exactly as you plan out, they're usually fairly flexible on that. So the impact of this activity, so it's had a huge impact, really. It has allowed me to reframe my research questions. I started with 5. I ended up drilling that down into 4 much more succinct and clear questions that articulate different aspects of findings that I imagine having. So it's really helped me think about the flow of my final thesis. It's refocused and updated my research proposal, including changing some of the methods I was planning to use, much more focus on interviewing and ethnographic observation, less on the archival research, because it didn't play out in my archival scoping visits that there were materials that were as useful as I imagined. It allowed me to apply for ethical approval and have real insight into the implications of the work that I was doing and the ethical considerations of working with human subjects. And if anyone wants to ask me questions about that process, you know, I'll share my email address at the end, because it is quite an involved process. If you haven't done it before, there is a lot of documentation you need, but because I had the confidence of having tested and tried out some of these approaches in this research visit approach, then the ethical approval felt like a much simpler process than it would have been otherwise. But the most important thing was it built my confidence and my capacity to undertake research. It has had an enormous impact on how I think of myself and my ability to strike up conversations with potential participants, reach out and be much more proactive about getting my research done. So yeah, and here is my updated research proposal, which has changed significantly, and I've not changed it once I'd gone through the process. So this is what was submitted to the first APR, the annual progress review, that some of you will be starting to prepare for, that happens in kind of May, June time. And I'm so confident with this, it hasn't changed shape since, which I'm really delighted about. So when I submit for this year's APR, this is still the absolute core of my project. So it's an ethnographic study that aims to critically examine the contemporary structures, purposes and behaviours of maker-led craft associations in Scotland through the observation of 4 such organisations, interviews with both maker members and policymakers, and archival research. This study will identify the internal and external factors that influence their development. And it seems like a very simple, succinct thing, but it's taken me a lot of work to get to that point. But the research support word helped me enormously. So final words of advice: document the little things. Sometimes you make big steps forward in your thinking in small areas. I would say that piloting things you're unsure about is a really good approach. If you want to do something but you've never done it before, maybe there's a small way that you can test it out on a very low risk approach. Talk to people about your project, talk to your peers, reach out to other academics, talk to people in your field that are connected. The more you talk openly about your project and, you know, say where it's difficult, where the language isn't right, the more confident you'll be in as it develops. And celebrate milestones. It can be really hard and you can get very tired and worn down when you're working on something by yourself. So sometimes it's really important to just stop and celebrate small things that happen. Maybe somebody emailed you back that helps, or maybe you finished writing a particularly hard paragraph, or yeah, celebrate things often. And my final thing is, don't be scared of change. The proposal, you've worked really hard to get a PhD proposal together. You might be very protective of it because you've had to, you know, campaign to be funded or to be allowed to do this PhD in the shape that you've designed it. But things change, and don't be scared of that. As you learn more about your subject, as you read more about the literature, as you come into contact with your sources and subject material, you will make changes to your overall project. Don't be scared of that. It's a really good thing, and it will be stronger as a result. So that is me. And
thank you so much.
it's my email address. If anyone wants to get in touch, happy to share.